All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to now just enter the final straight of the first day. This is now the session where we're going to just get some feedback from these breakout sessions. I heard at least two of the groups, and the discussions were really stimulating, really interesting. And I know they could have gone on probably through the night. So I'm really sorry to have to wrap them up. But it'll be great to hear from the rapporteurs now, from each of the groups, just some of the key points that came out of those discussions, and I hope we can capture them very well. I also want to remind you two things. Can you hear me? I've been getting feedback. So the indicator, yeah, the indicator is. Can you hear me at the back? Yes. All right. Good. All right. I'll speak up. Two things to remind you of organizationally. First of all, tonight is at 7:30. And we're going to have it outdoors, sort of semi-outdoors. There's a big tent just behind me over here. You can get there by going out of the hotel and around. It's a really nice location. We'll get some fresh air because we've all been stuck inside all day. So that's the first thing. That's at 7:30. And the other thing is that we still have our whiteboard just outside here. And I'm sure based on these conversations, you're really stimulated and full of ideas. So before you go and have your first beer in the tent, put your ideas down on the board and we'll capture those sort of action points that need to happen after this conference. So first of all, let's go in reverse order. We'll start with group 3 on CSO capacity and resilience. I believe Dario is going to do the feedback from that session. Is he here? Where is he? Dario, okay. Do you want to come and stand up? I'll hand over. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so about objective 3, we discussed about some general criticism related to the type of civil society organizations that can fulfill some of the indicators. So essentially, we discussed about the possibility of differentiate between large, well-established registered organization and small CSOs, which are not registered, or civic initiatives or other type of civil society entities that do not comply with such requirements. We discuss also about the importance of having more clarity about in some indicators, and this could be addressed by improving the methodological guide, the methodological note. Therefore, for instance, introducing some clarity, some explanation about what do we mean by cooperation with media, or what do we mean by having a gender equality policy. So we discussed about the possibility of being more clear in this regard and explain more in details what this definition mean. Then in another an important point is about the periodic review of these indicators and the need to have sort of a midterm analysis and revision, and this will of course be is already embedded in the document. It's foreseen that every year there will be an assessment and of course an evaluation of how the indicators are actually measuring the expected results, the objective 3. And then another important point relates to the possibility of making these indicators more to calibrate this indicator to the countries or to the context. For instance, there was an indicator related to transparency of public funding or transparency of source of funding. And for instance, in Turkey, this could be a problem for an NGO. And of course, this would not measure adequately the capacities of the transparency of the NGO. So this type of country-related aspects could be considered for during the measurements. And again, focus on actual implementation of policies or in general on performance rather than on compliance would be more adequate, because we have several indicators that are referring to presence of policies or presence of a certain type of staff, which of course is it could be easily measured, but does not give an indication about the actual performance of the organization as regards, for instance, communication and visibility, or implementation of or gender mainstreaming, just to mention another case. Then we had also discussion in relation to the fact that it's not easy, or methodologically speaking, is very complex to measure indicators that are not numerical or qualitative. So of course, ideally, would be important to measure the impact of civil society work in each country, but this of course poses a lot of methodological questions that requires a lot of resources, and of course are also exposed to other type of variables that may affect the real measurement. So we will not be 100% sure that this change is determined by CSOs, or to what extent political changes are also affecting the impact in the society.
It's really important to what kind of expectation one puts on the indicators, because I think it has to be clear that the specific objectives really lay down what it is that we're trying to achieve. Then the indicators, they paint a picture. They cannot paint the full picture. They can never do that. It's a selection of indicators that will give us a good idea on where we're heading, let's say. And I think, for example, on the gender policy, of course, it's not enough to have a policy. It's the same with we've said with the legislation that has to be in place at national level. It's about how it's implemented. But it's quite possible that the first thing that you need to have is some kind of policy. And maybe that is where we stand today. If we realize in this assessment report that we do first that actually everybody already has this, then maybe we need to change and look how one can get more into depth of that. And I also think one can very well imagine that every year one takes a few of these indicators and get into more detail of what they actually mean as a sort of complement to the general report. It's just that one cannot expect that the indicators can absolutely capture everything. I just wanted to say that. Back to you. You have your own. Okay, so I keep it.
Thanks, Lotta. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. It's one research tool amongst many, and it captures a small picture, but you don't see what's behind it. You don't see the other parts unless you do more work. So it helps us anyway. So let's go to group 2. Who is the rapporteur for group 2? I was in group 2. Yes. Do you want to come up to the front? Come up to the front, and I'll give you a microphone if that's all right. You can put your laptop, then everyone can see you comfortably.
Hi. Thank you. So my name is Tanya. I come from a think tank based in North Macedonia, Reactor, and I would like to shortly wrap up of what was discussed in group 2. I'm also representing the coalition for furthering gender equality in the Western Balkans countries, and we also tackled this issue in our discussion, but let's see what we had as main points. So we started with something that Michaela said this morning, that strong democracy means strong civil society. And in order to have strong civil society, we need to have enabling environment and inclusive partner cooperation. So the EU guidelines for civil society organization and the cooperation between us or among us, because there is a tripartite system, are extremely important in order to provide this as a sustainable ground for further growth. And we see the civil society guidelines as a tool for unified approach to enable this environment and install the principal objectives of the cooperation of the CSOs, as our minister said this morning. It is also a very good framework at regional level, not only national, which means that we can measure each other and we can share good practices among each other, and also work on the same problems that we are all facing, because our discussion also showed that we tackle the same challenges in our countries, and no matter how different we think we are, actually we are pretty much the same when it comes to human rights and civil society issues that concern us all. So what is important for this is goodwill, but not only goodwill, also a structured mechanism for cooperation and dialogue, and treating all partners equally. So there were some good examples shared from the region of sitting together at the same table. Sitting together at the same table and trying to trust one another. Trust was mentioned as a huge issue behind our progress. And some good examples of building trustful relationships were also shared between the public authorities and the CSOs in the region, which is a must. And we need to have an open dialogue from both sides, which must be supported and also measured by the indicators that we are talking about so much today, but they're very important if we want to measure our progress. And especially what was also pointed out in the discussion is the context in which we measure our indicators, because there are a lot of indicators and it's really an ambitious data quality collection behind them. Speaking from a point of a researcher, I really know what it means and all the challenges that we are facing when we want to structure such a huge survey when it comes to measuring the CSO guidelines and their success. So it's very important to include the CSOs in this monitoring process, but it's also important to emphasize that we need to measure the effectiveness, the intersectionality, and the horizontal topics like gender and vulnerable groups in general. So we shouldn't forget them as well. And also we were talking about inclusive process in creation of policies. And there is an example indicator in our guidelines. It's 2.1a, which says that effective CSO consultations should involve reports on public consultations, reasons for rejection, which are published in timely manner. This is something we are missing, and this is very palpable to be measured in recent future. So I would say that this such an example of an indicator can be easily measured, but we also need to consider the type of CSOs and the capacity of CSOs. We talked about proactiveness, which is very important, and there should be proactiveness on the side of CSOs, but also we need to bear in mind the capacity and knowledge of CSOs to interact in processes as well, especially when it comes to local governments and local grassroots organizations. So another very important topic, last but not least, is how to include the local and grassroots organizations in this process and how to measure their progress. So perhaps joint partnerships with national organizations and local grassroots organizations is also important in all of this process that we are discussing today. I think I'm trying to be short and it's not my best. So I think I have used my, there was a long discussion and I tried to figure out the key points that we were discussing. But what is very important is that we need an open dialogue, and we have a regional tool that we can use in further strengthening our relationships and dialogue, not only between the government and the civil society organizations, but also with the EU institutions as well. That would be all.
Thanks very much indeed. That was great. A great summary of a really interesting discussion. I think one of the things that's notable for me is that in both the third group and the second group, there was a long discussion about capturing impact. Although I'm facilitating, maybe should I answer that question? Or because we've discussed it a lot. Just how to do that methodologically, it's incredibly difficult because, you know, if you're thinking about capturing impact of a local level service provider and at the same time a sort of national level policy advocacy think tank. There's no standard indicator. There's no standard way of looking at that and understanding the impact, and then trying to capture that of all the diversity of civil society is an extremely difficult task. And I think it's, you know, we said, look, this is just feasibly, this is not practical. But what is practical is to ask organizations how much they evaluate their own work, how much they examine and explore their own work as a proxy indicator for saying, actually, do you think about impact, and do you look and understand and learn from what you're doing to see whether you're achieving impact? And that becomes quite a useful proxy to say, okay, so out of all the organizations we survey, this number have done an evaluation exercise, whether it can be internal. We're not talking about very formal, external, expensive stuff. We're talking about internal exercises to say, actually, have we learned anything? Have we sat down deliberately to learn about what we're doing to assess our impact? And if the answer is yes, then you know, and if we see change over the years, if we see an increasing number of organizations actually deliberately looking at whether they're achieving impact, then we can say, yes, look, there's something going on here that indicates positive change. So it's a different approach. It's a bit more, it doesn't capture everything you want to capture, but it tells us something. So I think that's kind of anyway, so I'll put my other hat on now as the moderator for this session, and then ask the group one, which I think probably had the most dynamic. Yeah, of course. Let me. Oh, you can have a microphone there.
And all my group members, please feel free after I do it, because I'm sure that I didn't cover all. So let's start. So the question was, how do the guidelines help in enlarging, protecting, and monitoring civic space? So the first comments were, guidelines give us a framework for the report, which allows and opens a discussion within civil society. Some questions that you can start to think about. Guidelines are also used for the democratic transition for our countries, and it's not easy to bring standards. So there were some appreciation about building up such standards in Taxo. So these guidelines also shows a path about how to move forward, but also it affects the comprehensiveness of civil society as an end result. But it's a challenging task. However, we have a shrinking space all around the world, but also specifically in member and enlarging countries. Many CSOs is forced to get close, or that they are trying to survive. Moreover, it's not the same world as our societies is too much polarized and politicized, and initiative was to enjoy democratic freedoms and being transparent, but unfortunately we are losing this game. So there were other comments about specific subjects such as youth. What about young generation? One of our colleagues as CSOs are willing to get engaged to, for instance, such meetings, or who will enable this space for civil society? Did Taxo help enough to inclusiveness? Do we see growth in number in these conferences, or do we see all the same actors around? So there were a comment about the cooperation with state, and colleagues said that not necessary to cooperate sometimes with institutions, because sometimes they even put barriers against the effort of the CSOs. And another comment is, the guideline is a very ambitious job to protect and monitor the civic space, but the question is, how can we do this job with this tool? Is this methodology enough? There is a civil society also, there's a civil society subsector. However, in different ministries, these indicators should also be implied, and in all areas, not only in civil sector. For instance, there are other IPA windows, and these indicators should be also implemented in these windows, such as climate, etc. And these indicators should be also mainstreamed. All EU mechanisms should participate in it. And there was a question, there might be a shadow report from CSOs, and an input was that maybe also about the report, but also how Taxo implemented and used this methodology. The shadow report could also be about this. And there should be instant inputs. One of our colleagues contributed that not yearly reports are not enough. EU should react immediately. So there should be instant inputs, not yearly reports. There were a critical comment about small groups. The small groups, they said sometimes in the indicator, it said that, for instance, small groups should act unregistered, but not only small groups, but other groups as well can be freely act even if they are unregistered. About the awareness in the government, you need awareness on the side of the government. There are fears that people, for instance, in government sometimes think that civil society have a particular agenda, and there are, for instance, some officers who have a job to perform, and they just see a strategic document and they even don't understand fully sometimes. So we should communicate with them why it is important. We should explain and how it helps your job as an also officer, and we should build networks. However, there were a critical comment on this issue that even though we build up networks, we create bonds with officials, they could be removed and people can change in government and also public institutions. What is important is the political drive. If there is no political drive from the side of the government, these networks could collapse easily. So it also were emphasized that there are many monitoring reports from civil society sharing the same indicators, but there should be independent reports as well. It's also important. We should be more open, not diplomatic in our reports, and these reports should also talk to Taxos reports. And the issue of gongos were also raised, that the gongos were not emphasized enough in the indicators that the critic was. However, the answer was that it was referred to, but not with its name as gongos. But also still there were other critics about Taxo didn't define gongos enough and underline the fear and the problems that created by the gongos. So there are lots of things. I don't know, maybe I can stop here so other colleagues can contribute.
Maybe I can just add that there was also several comments about the indicator 1.10 on volunteering, where there was discussions that maybe actually this indicator that is on the law on volunteering, maybe it's not needed because maybe there's no need for a formal legislative framework for that. So that was also another comment that was referred. And then, yes, there was so many comments. Yeah, I don't know if someone wants to add something that is very important and pressing for this result one. Otherwise, I think.
If I may. Yes, yes. I just wanted to reflect on just some feedback on those comments that were raised. One, I think we've heard throughout today the importance that is placed on also taking into account that there are grassroots organizations that may not be registered but that should still have the same space, let's say. And I think I really want to point out that is covered in the guidelines. You have it in this 1.5 indicator, which says exactly this. There has to be ways for also non-registered organization and grassroots organization to participate in policy work, etc. And then I want to say, I think there's also a responsibility here that civil society organizations have themselves to try and also assist smaller organizations to become more effective and to participate. And one way that we are trying to support that from the side of the European Commission is by this financial support to third parties that we allow in our contracts with larger organizations. And so that means basically sub-granting, but I think we're trying to encourage that the sub-granting is accompanied by some kind of capacity building from the main organizations. And I think that's really something that's proven very useful. I know it's more work for the our contracting partners, but it's also something that can really have an interesting result. And I think that it would be interesting to sort of expand a bit on that, to sort of adopt small organizations and also help them with these perhaps more far-reaching objectives that we have in terms of transparency and accountability and so on, because smaller organizations can also move in this direction over time. And again, the indicator is not trying to capture everything that's going on, but it's supposed to give a picture, flavor of how things stand in that area. There were many interesting things in your group, but I think I'll give the floor back to you. Thank you.
No, there is a lot. And I'd like to just, I think Snezhana is still online. So I'd like to, I think she might have some comments to come back on the three group discussions. So I'd just like to hand over to Snezhana if that's possible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Can I receive a nod so that I
Hi
know I'm
there.
heard?
Hi, we can't hear you. Oh, hang on. No, it's not your problem, it's ours.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, excellent. So I'd like to thank all the participants for this fascinating conversation. And again, if I'm allowed to express my regret for not being there in person. There was a wealth of insights shared from a range of perspectives, and I think very valuable perspectives that should inform the way forward for the guidelines. So a couple of points I'm taking away from this conversation from the last session, and I will be very, very brief. I think one area of issues relates to the interpretation of indicators. And I think in this regard, there is a methodological guide that provides the definition of indicators and the definition of terms, but I think that is a bit of a working document, because the interpretation of indicators has always to be meaningful for the context. So it needs to cover any issues arising, and I think the language of the indicators as such allows for that, allows for the interpretation to be meaningful, consistent, but also applicable to the various contexts. So this is something to keep in mind. And, 158 comes to mind. And, why are we talking only about small organizations? What if you have a large non-registered organization? They should be allowed to exist as well. And again, I don't think there is anything in the indicator that precludes from that understanding. And that interpretation of the indicator itself. I do note that there was a degree of controversy regarding the specific objective around the CSO accountability. So again, I think taking that forward in a way that makes sense and in a way that, again, does not compromise the intent behind that specific objective will be quite important. And it has to be done in a way which indeed accounts for the vast diversity of CSOs. So that's a bit of a methodological challenge. And I think it will be a bit of a learning process in ensuring that gets, that it's gotten right at the end. And there always may be space there always may be some space that requires further adjustment, just because the space is so diverse. So I think that's in terms of the interpretation of indicators. A second set of comments was about the methodology. And, what's the role of CSOs? How do you ensure consistent methodology? How do you make this a practically doable task? And here, I just like to reiterate what Richard said at the very beginning. We do have an idea how this needs to be taken forward, but that's also open for adaptation and for learning after it's been tried once and then going forward. The penultimate comment or set of comments was about, what happens with the guidelines? How do we ensure it's not just a paper that collects dust in the drawer somewhere? How do we make sure it's a living document? And I think the responsibility here is somewhat shared. Probably the biggest chunk of it rests on the European Commission and various structures and entities of the European Union to ensure that the document is a living document within the EU, and then to make sure it's as strong as possible vis-a-vis the external stakeholders, the governments and civil society. But then again, as with any such document, the more you use it, the more meaningful it becomes. So it's a bit of a catch-22 as well. And in this regard, I think it was made quite clear that this monitoring monitoring shouldn't be kind of a one-off annual exercise. There needs to be continuous engagement with the guidelines, you know, by the Commission, by the delegations. When issues arise and they are contrary to the guidelines, they need to be raised on an ongoing basis. And I think that's a very valid comment. And finally, it was remarked that, you know, governments need to be part of this discussion as well, and ensuring participation of governments in the implementation of the guidelines, for want of a better word, will also be very important. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Snezha. Thank you. We're sort of out of time, but I wanted really just to give you a chance. So we've just had this really kind of unbelievably rich conversation, just even within an hour and a half, and so much has come out of it. So if anyone just wants to add something at this point, just to capture something, or say this is really important, this is, I think, what the priority should be, or anything you want to say at this point, please do. We have a comment over here. We have a microphone.
Hello, Milutin Milosevic, Dark Policy Network, Southeast Europe. I participated in the first group. Just want to emphasize, I wanted to say something, but there was no time. There were so many people, and all the discussion was quite good, and it's really good to notice everything. But there are 2 points which were raised, which came out below the radar, which I would like to emphasize. The first one is when we talk about the small organizations, kind of call it just initiatives and everything. There was a good point from a gentleman from Macedonia who said that actually most of the support goes to big organizations. So we have big organizations, we have small raising organizations, and we have a lot of them who are middle-sized, which are in between, which are just sometimes getting something. There is a difference between supporting small, growing organizations and giving most of the money or support to big organizations. And the second point is from the gentleman from Bosnia, who said that the most important thing which we should evaluate is the impact of what we do, not the indicators only. Indicators are showing the result of the activity, of the process, but the impact is what's worth. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Taxo started in 2009. It's, let's say, 13 years. What's the real impact? What's the change which was made? Not what we did, not the projects we implemented, not the activities which came out, not the indicators which show, but what's the real impact? And that's what we need to evaluate. Thank you.
I wanted to propose, on the one hand, that we'll do maybe a Zoom meeting where you can actually present the methodological guide for those who are interested in the details, because I think it's very rich, it's very thought out, and it's worth it to sort of be aware of what's in there. I think it does answer some of the questions that have been put today. We couldn't have it in the session. We would have spent all day just on that, so we couldn't cover that. But it's available. I think you should do a session on that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was in some of the sort of small conversations I've been having, I think we emphasize the importance of having a sort of open source methodology, that the methodology is open to scrutiny and feedback, so that we can continuously improve it. I think that's probably one of the most important things we can do to have a credible assessment process, and an assessment process that actually improves year on year. Because I've said many times, we won't get it perfectly right the first time, but if we learn from that, we'll improve and it'll get better. So okay, I think on that I will let you go and rest a little bit. It's been a very, very intense day. You probably need a bit of a breather, a bit of fresh air. We'll have some really nice fresh air outside for dinner. Just as I said, behind us here in I say tent. It's not like chateau tent. It's a big tented area with fresh air, and we'll have a nice dinner out there. But take a rest, and we'll see you at 7:30 for a bite to eat. I mean, carry on the conversation, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh yes. And before you go, can we just put up the presentation again? And go to, where's the slide mover? Where's this? Yeah, just before I forget. So tomorrow starts at 9:30. And we don't have a plenary to start with. We go straight into breakout sessions. And we have 4 breakout sessions. And here they are, by the magic of technology. So we have 4 breakout sessions. Session 1 is on the green agenda, and that'll be here in this plenary room. Session 2 is on rule of law, and that's next door in K2. Session 3 is on human rights, and that'll be on one of the 2. I haven't been upstairs yet, in one of the 2 rooms upstairs. And in session 4 on CSOs and the media, that'll also be upstairs on the mezzanine level. That's from 9:30 till 11. The moderators are Birgit Schacht. I don't know if she's, I haven't met her. You're Birgit. Nice to meet you. So you can follow Birgit tomorrow morning at 9:30. There's a guy called Richard Allen for session 2. Özge, where's Özge? Özge's over here. Session 3. And Afrodita, where's Afrodita? Is she here? Afrodita's over there. So follow Afrodita at 9:30 in the morning if you want to talk about media and civil society. Thank you all once again very much, and have a great evening, and see you later.